You
This
go, Cheryl,
conference
you're
will now be
falling asleep on
recorded.
your job, Cheryl. Okay, yes. So Rosh Hashanah, the start of the year. And we're going to see how those words, that name, is actually very, very instructive in what is going on. Now, we are familiar that our holidays all resonate, they reflect different events that took place, right? Pesach is the time that we left Egypt. The seventh day of Pesach is the splitting of the Red Sea and our passing through. We count 49 days and we come to Shavuot, which is the holiday that we stood by Mount Sinai. Sukkot, so that represents not a single event, but a 40-year event of us being in the desert and either under the clouds of glory or actual Sukkot. Different opinions. What does the Sukkah that we build and live in for that week, what does that represent? But our holidays reflect clear events that took place. And our rabbinic holidays also. Purim, of course, is a celebration of the deliverance that took place during the time of Achashverosh and Haman, via Mordechai and Esther. And Hanukkah, of course, we know that was during during the temple period, when we were under the control of the Assyrian Greeks and the Maccabim, and we were able to be delivered from there. So our holidays reflect different events that took place in Jewish history. Rosh Hashana, we know the start of the year is a Yom Hadin, is a day of judgment. But what does that reflect? So as an introduction, there's a beautiful article on aish.com where Rabbi Nehemiah Coopersmith explains the idea with the following example. And he writes, there is a scene in Kurt Vonnegut's novel Breakfast of Champions that brings home the meaning of God as king. The main character, Kilgore Trout, is having a drink in a bar, minding his own business. Suddenly he senses an awesome presence about to enter the bar. He breaks out into a cold sweat. Who walks in? Kurt Vonnegut. When the author of the book steps into the novel to visit his character, Kilgore's perception of his world turns upside down. He realizes he does not exist independently. Rather, every moment of his life requires a new stroke of the author's pen. Without the author, he ceases to exist. He also realizes that his universe exists only in the mind of the author, that beyond his ephemeral world, there is a higher dimension, the realm of Kurt Vonnegut, that is more real than his own. He also discovers that literally everything in his universe is an expression of the author, Kurt Vonnegut. Because in Kilgore's world, the author is the only being that has true existence. That is Rosh Hashana, my friends. When we realize that we are all but a stroke of the pen, so to speak, of Hashem, and that our existence is completely dependent upon His, and that we are existing in the world that He has created only for as long as He wills us to be here. Every single beat of our heart is a gift of time that He gives us, and we are in His hands every moment. So on Rosh Hashanah, when we refer to God as a melech, as a king, that is, and to us a king is a silly figure in most countries, so it doesn't necessarily resonate with us, but that is the understanding. that we are existing by the will of God every moment, as in this example, the character in the novel only exists as long as the author of that novel wills that he continues to exist. So with that, let us step back to how we began. So all of our holidays resonate with an event. How about Rosh Hashana? So let's look at the Medrash on Vayikra. Tani was taught b'shem Rabbi Lazar, in the name of Rabbi Lazar, b'chafhei be'elul nivra ha'olam. The creation began on the 25th day of Elul. If the creation began on the 25th day of Elul, then what day or what date, what day of creation is Rosh Hashana? That would be the 6th day of creation. The view of Rav agrees with the above teaching of Rabbi Elazar. We have learned in the shofar benediction, right? We have on our Musaf Shmona Esrei, we have a bracha based on a blessing based on Malchiyut, God's kingdom, on Zichronot, God's remembrance, and on Shofarot. In the bracha of Shofarot, composed by Rav, we say, Zehayom Tchilat Ma'asecha. This is the day of the beginning of your handiwork. Zikaron Liyom Rishon, a memorial of the first day. Ki chok li Yisroel hu. It is a decree for Israel. Val medinot bo yomar, on this day, about the nations, the countries, it is said, Ezo lecherev, ezo lishalom. Who for sword, who for peace. Ezo lerav, ezo lesova. Who for famine, who for plenty. Uvriot bo yipchakedu liskarim l'chaim l'mavet. And every creature is scrutinized and recorded for life or for death. But I don't understand. Help me out over here. We just said that the world was created on the 25th day of Elul. So how can we say about Rosh Hashana, today is a beginning of your handiwork, a memorial of the first day? It's not the first day, it's the 6th day. How do we, in the very same paragraph, speak about the world creation taking place the 25th day of Elul, and Rosh Hashanah 6 days later being called the first day? What do you say, my friends? Someone unmute. Yes, Cheryl.
Well, that's the day he created man.
Oh, so why would that correct? Good. Why would the creation of man be considered the first day when we know it's the 6th day according to the Torah?
Because that was maybe the time that the earthly missions could be given out by Hashem and man as an agent for those earthly missions.
Beautiful, beautiful. That is the day, thank you, Janet, when we can realize the purpose of creation. And everything else in this incredible world is a prop, is there to help us some way in our mission, to provide the environment of our mission. And our mission, which will speak very, very much to the idea of Rosh Hashanah, is to partner with God in this creation. So therefore, if one is assembling a machine, the first day of the machine is not when the parts start to arrive. The first day of that machine is when it has been fully assembled and can now serve the purpose it's meant to serve as whatever machine it might be. And therefore, this is the day, the first day, the day of the beginning of your handiwork, a memorial of the first day, a decree for Israel, a law of the God of Jacob. This is the point, the beginning of the purpose of creation. Free-willed beings, mankind, will make decisions to partner with God in the purpose of this world, which is making it more godly, improving this world, elevating this world. Okay, so we're starting to make some headway. But what is the connection between that and the second half of that first paragraph? On this day, sentence is pronounced upon countries, sword, peace, famine, plenty. Every creature scrutinized, recorded for life or for death. So let's see the second paragraph of this medrash. Nimsei Omer. According to this, we say B'yom Rosh Hashana b'shar rishona. The medrash says, on the very first hour of this day, the idea of creating man entered God's mind. In the second hour, he took counsel with the ministering angels. In the third, he assembled Adam's dust. In the fourth, he kneaded it. In the fifth, he shaped him. In the sixth, he made him into a lifeless body. In the seventh, he breathed a soul into him. In the eighth, he brought him into the Garden of Eden. I think there's a television show, my kids were very into it, years and years ago, called 24. And each hour was like this whole crazy episode. It was 24 hours of a show, but each hour was like a whole, that's what we have over here. This is the real 24. In the eighth, he brought him into the Garden of Eden. In the ninth, Adam was commanded against eating from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In the 10th, he transgressed. In the 11th, he was judged. In the 12th, he was pardoned. The pardoning we know we'll soon discuss. Oh, so now we're making more headway. This is the day of man's creation, and therefore man's being judged. Man was judged on that very first day. So if we're saying that Jewish history and Jewish holidays reflect Jewish history, then this is reflecting not just Jewish history, but the history of mankind. So what event? Pesach reflects Exodus, and Shavuot reflects Mount Sinai. And what does Rosh Hashana reflect? Man's creation and man being judged. So if we understand that a Jewish holiday is not simply a commemoration of an event that took place, but it is a re-entering of that zone. So therefore, Pesach time, we re-enter a time of redemption, of deliverance, of being able to throw off our shackles. And Shavuot is a time where we can have our own personal Kriyat, Kabbalat Torah, accepting of the Torah. Then Rosh Hashanah is a time of what, my friends? Where we can recreate ourselves. And it is a day that we are judged. Now, at first glance, if we are reliving Adam's judgment, it doesn't sound so great. What was Adam's judgment? Banished from the Garden of Eden. With the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread. And Chava, the difficulty of raising children, of conception, of pregnancy, of childbirth. It doesn't sound like such a great model for us to follow. However, let's continue. Source number 2. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'Adam, Hashem said to Adam, Zeh siman levanecha. This will be the siman, the model, the sign for your descendants. Kishem shamat lefanai badin hayom hazeh, the same way that you stood before me in judgment on this day. V'yatzata b'dimus, and you left with clemency. Kach atidin banecha la'amod lefanai b'din b'yom zeh. So too your descendants will stand before me on this day. V'yotzin lefanai b'dimus, and they too will leave with clemency. Ematai, when is that? You guessed it. B'chodesh hashvi'i be'echad lachodesh. On Rosh Hashana, on the 7th month, on the first day of that month. Now it's interesting. What was the clemency over there? We say that Adam left with clemency. What was the clemency of being booted out of the Garden of Eden, of having to toil and eat the thorns and the thickets, even with the sweat of his brow, and the woman having all the difficulties of pregnancy and labor and child rearing? The clemency was that in the new state that they had put themselves in as a result of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, this now became their optimal environment. Whereas prior to that, the best place for their growth and self-realization and self-actualization was in the Garden of Eden. Once they had eaten from the Eitz Hadat, the best place for their growth and self-actualization and self-realization was in a less giving world, in a world where they would need to ply out that blessing from it, where it would be more challenging. That became the ideal world for them. And that then is their clemency. As the Maharsha, we'll see, source number 3 points out, that's why Rosh Hashana was established on the 1st of Tishrei. With the world was created there. Dahainu, meaning ha'adam, like Cheryl said, meaning mankind. Uvo ba'adam lidin, and that's where mankind came to be judged al shechet, on the sin. Vishav Adam Harishon, and Adam did teshuva, he repented. V'kadosh Baruch Hu barachamim shebar olam machalo, and God, with the compassion through which he created the world, he forgave him. V'akim bo bayom nivru avot Avraham and Yaakov, and therefore it was on this day that the forefathers Avram and Yaakov were born, on Rosh Hashana. Al Shem Midat Chesed V'Rachamim, and they represent Chesed, kindness, Rachamim, compassion. V'hu Simil V'neihem Lavo Yimahem B'Rachamim Badin B'Yom Hazeh, which is a sign to their descendants that they would be judged together with them through mercy. Yes, Chaya Rivka.
Excuse me, I wanted to ask it a little while ago. You said before that at some point that human being can recreate ourselves. And then you went into saying that was when they were in the garden. And then they moved on to out of the garden, so they lived in a different environment, and their optimal ability was lessened to a certain extent because they're no longer in this perfect garden. But what does it mean they can recreate themselves? Does that mean they could live up to their potential?
Yeah. So what I had said is that just as mankind was created on Rosh Hashana, it is a time where we can recreate ourselves.
Even today.
I'm sorry?
Today, right
Yes.
now.
Yes,
It wasn't just then.
correct.
Okay, so
That's
we can.
that's the station. Pesach, we return every year to a point of freedom, of being able to liberate ourselves from that which constrains us, right? Mitzrayim, Egypt, comes from the root word meitzar, which means constraints, narrow straits. And we have our own Yitziat Mitzrayim every year, our own exodus, potential exodus from that which constrains us every year, Pesach, and every year, Shavuot, we have the opportunity to accept the Torah anew. Every year, Rosh Hashana, we have a unique opportunity to recreate ourselves, even though every day we can redirect ourselves, but Rosh Hashana, and every day we can accept Torah, and every day we can try to liberate ourselves, but this is the time that we re-enter that zone with the opportunity for this recreation.
So this recreation comes actually from the holidays, the timing of the year. It isn't
Yes,
necessary, even though we could do it, you say we could do it at any time, but it's more likely to come when there's a special time of the year.
there's an
There's
availability.
energy that
Yes,
that 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 helps us.
yes. The Jewish year is a Ma'agal Hashanah. It's a cycle, and like in Epcot theme park, where you enter into a different pavilion, and now you're in England, and now you're in Sweden, and now you're in, right, in each place you enter, you're entering that world. So too we make our way around the year, and we enter these different zones where there is this potential, this availability. Perhaps in the Epcot Swedish zone you'll be able to find a beer, but it'll be a lot easier to find it once you enter London in that Epcot zone. So too, each availability is always there, but it's a lot harder at different points in the year. During these holidays, there is a special, we'll call it spiritual energy, spiritual availability, that as we make our way around the year, we enter these different zones.
And Hashem created these zones to help us live up to our potential.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's
Thank you.
exactly right. And Rabbi Tate's now number 4 from Living Inspired is going to speak to this very point. Number 4, as the energy of time cycles through its phases, it reaches peaks which are specific to its seasons. The energy which lends itself to inspiring and revitalizing the point of beginning peaks at Rosh Hashana, the new year. One who wishes to elevate and amplify his power of new creation, the ability to be always new and self-generating, should utilize the spiritual power of Rosh Hashana to the fullest. Rosh Hashana is the beginning of the year. The spiritual forces operating at moments of beginning are unique. Hakol holech achar ha-rosh. Everything follows the head, the beginning. The entire course of any process is determined by its beginning. This is because a beginning is a conception, and conception represents the laying down of the genes, which are the blueprint for everything which is built later. And we understand now, on a scientific biological sense, that the point of conception, that's where our genes were locked in. 23 from mom, 23 from dad. And that gives us our 46, and we can't change those genes. They are set. That is who and what we are. There's wiggle room within that genetic composition of what a person can do and can't do. And that is our area of choice and growth. But conception determines so much about us. The spiritual rule is that the closer to the moment of conception, the more potent and critical the forces. A small injury to the human body may not be of major significance in an adult, A fetus during its development is much more sensitive to such an event. And a minute change to the genes, if there is a mutation in one of the genes, may have the most far-reaching results imaginable. At the moment of conception, all details are being coded most potently. It is therefore the most critical moment. No subsequent moment can have the intensity and significance of that first moment. The flash of conception contains everything. All later development is simply a revelation of what was created during that first flash. The color of our eyes, our height, our build, all of that is simply a revelation of the genes that came together 23 plus 23 at the time that we each were conceived. Rosh Hashana is the conception of the year, and the next 10 days are its gestation. That is why these days are so critical to the whole year. That is why a person is judged for the entire year as one appears on Rosh Hashana. The personality as it exists then is the core. It'll take supreme effort later to change. Change on Rosh Hashanah is much easier. One can manipulate the genes of one's character then. And now we have surgeries that take place in the womb. And they even try to change the genes at times. People of spiritual knowledge take extreme care to live perfectly. On Rosh Hashanah, the year is being conceived. Many have a custom not to sleep, at least during the morning hours. They wish to lay down the genes of the year in consciousness, not oblivion. What is the source of this special energy? The first Rosh Hashanah ever, which of course must represent its true nature most powerfully. So if Rosh Hashanah is the core of the entire year, then the first Rosh Hashanah is the core of every following Rosh Hashanah. That must represent its true nature most powerfully was the day of the creation of man. That day of creation was the world's first Rosh Hashanah, and its climactic event that we refer to as the beginning of your acts, the first day, was the creation of the human. That is why the day always retains its power to recreate man. When we genuinely and intensely decide to elevate our personalities on Rosh Hashanah, become inspired to live the coming year as higher beings, we are using the day's deeply rooted energy as the day of human creation, of our own recreation. The day has the power to energize real change and help a person become unrecognizably different. Now, this is the day of the first of your acts, and it is, of course, referred to as a Yom Hadin, a day of judgment. So how are we to understand this judgment? What is being judged? And once again, that is going to be contained to a certain degree in the very name of this day. Let's look at number 5, which is the Gemara, the Babylonian Talmud, understandably so in the tractate of Rosh Hashana, in the tractate that deals with Rosh Hashana. The Mishnah there says, Ba'arba'a prakim ha'olam nidon. There are 4 points, times of the year, when the world is judged. The Pesach is the start of the harvest time. The world is judged in ala tvua, on the produce, on the harvest. Ba'atzeret, Shavuot, al peirot ha'ilon, on the fruit trees. Right? Of course, the fruit trees aren't being judged have they produced good fruit or not, but the judgment is what sort of fruit and produce will be available for mankind. For Rosh Hashana, on Rosh Hashana, Kol Ba'ei Olam, all those who come to the world, Ovrin Lefanav, they pass before God, Ki B'nei Maron, like B'nei Maron, and there are three different explanations of B'nei Maron. We'll go with the sheep that are in a pen and are now being brought out from the pen through a small opening, one at a time, so they can be counted. And each one is scrutinized. As it says, Shenem hayotzer yachad libam, he created, he sees together their hearts. Hamevin el kol ma'aseyim, he understands all of their actions. And we'll soon delve into this. Lastly, number 4, uvechag, and on the holiday, that's a reference to Sukkot, nidonin al hamayim, there is the judgment over water, what type of droughts or plenty will there be in that forthcoming year. Rambam Maimonides, in his book on the laws of repentance, Hilchos Teshuvah, says as follows, and this is so important. The shikul zeh, this reckoning, this weighing, Eino lefi minyan, it's not simply based on the number of zechuyot, of merits and avonot or sins. Ela lefi godalam, but rather according to their size, their magnitude. What does that mean? Who can determine that? Yesh zechut shehi keneged kama avonot. There might be one merit which might outweigh many, many missteps, mistakes, sins. Shneimar says, Yanim davar tov, because there was found in him a good quality that who knows what that can outweigh. The yesh avon, and there are some sins shu keneged kama zechuyot, which are equal to numerous merits. As it says, V'chote echad yovo tova harbe, one sin can cause the loss of much good. How does it get weighed? Ve'ein shoklin ela bedato shelkel deot. It can only be weighed according to the understanding, the wisdom of the knowing God. V'hu hayodea, and he knows heyach orchen hazuchuyo keneged avonot, how to measure one against the other. And the Talmud elsewhere in Avodah Zarah tells us that whatever a person's ultimate judgment, now realize we're not talking yet about ultimate judgment, that's after 120 years. But when a person reaches that point of the ultimate judgment, the person is the first one to sign on and say, emet, truth, correct, accurate, just, deserved. But let's keep in mind, as we'll soon see, this is not talking about the after 120 year assessment of what one has accomplished in their lifetime. This is an annual. And Rabbi Yisroel Salanter in number 7 explains so beautifully. Every action, yitchalek al pi ha'pu'ula v'al pi ha'po'el. Right? In Hebrew, it's so beautiful. The pu'ula is the action, and the po'el is the one who acted. So every action is assessed according to the action itself and the actor, the person who performed the action. First, let's look at the action. From the perspective of the action, every good action is gauged by the results which it produces. A person will be praised for his actions accordingly. To the extent that there are beneficial results, an action will be considered to be qualitatively better. All good actions that follow as a result of that one good action will stand in the person's merit. This was expressed by the sages that they said, Hazuchut yesh la keren v'yesh la perot. A merit has both keren, the principle, and the fruit, and that which resulted from it. All of that gets taken into account when we do a good action, not just the action itself, but where did that action go? What was the rebound effects? What was those ripples that spread out from that good action? And how much of a ripple effect of good was spread out? All of that is attributed. All of that is contained in that. All of that is considered part of what the person did. Whereas Aveira, yesh la keren ve'ein la perot. Whereas a transgression has principle and has no fruit. God in his mercy does not take into account the ripple effects. That is mitzad pu'ula, from the vantage point of the action. How about mitzad ha'poel, the person doing it? Yitchalek kol davar tov. So too, every good action is measured by the quality of the effort that goes into its performance. As our sages teach, lefum tsara agra, according to the difficulty, the tsar, the anguish, then that leads to the reward. How much did a person put into it? I've often told the story that when I was teaching in the yeshiva in Israel, and so a friend came to visit. So I was going through the dorm to try to gather my guys for the shiur, for the class. And I was referring to all the guys I saw as tzaddik, tzaddik, tzaddik. And he said afterwards to me, he said, are you kidding? These guys aren't tzaddikim? I mean, I understand you're trying to bring them closer, but what's with all the tzaddik stuff? And I said to these guys at tzaddikim, some of these guys have had some very, very negative experiences. And for them to put on tefillin in the morning is a lot more of a struggle than it is for you and for me, I said to my friend. And probably their one tefillin is equal to our whole year of tefillin. All that is weighed. How much is a person putting into it? How difficult is it? How much is that person pushing themselves? Lefum tsara agra, according to the effort is the reward, it says in Pirkei Avot. And so too with every bad action. It is judged by the quality of the effort it would have taken to avoid it. The more difficult to avoid, the less severe the accountability. As once again the sages said, Rabbi Meir said, greater is the punishment for failing to wear white tzitzit strings than the punishment for failing to wear the blue one. The blue is very difficult. We don't even have them nowadays. Some do have blue tzitzit, but for the most part, we don't know what is the proper dye for that. So we have all of our tzitzit strings are all white. But when the blue was available, it was a lot more expensive, a lot harder to get. So if a person fails to wear the blue one, that's more understandable than failing to wear the white ones. Compared to what can this be? Compared to a king of flesh and blood who had two servants. He ordered one, bring me a seal made of plaster, and to the other, bring me a seal made of gold. Neither of them listened, neither brought their seals to the king. Who should be given the greater punishment? Surely the one who did not even bring the seal made of plaster. That was an easy one. Why didn't you do that? The more difficult we could understand. So once again, all of that is taken into account. How much effort? Someone sometimes says, oh, I couldn't do it. I was too tired. That's an opportunity. If it's hard to come to minyan, if it's hard to come to a class, if it's hard to whatever it might be, to give the chesed, then that's worth 100. The Gemara actually says once Bitsar, doing something once with difficulty, is equal to 100 when it's easy. So when it's hard and we push ourselves, we have 100 times in the bank. That's the reason to go ahead and do it, not the reason to say, I'm going to sleep through this one. That is what the Rambam means. No individual can estimate the consequences of his actions in order to judge the value of his mitzvot and transgressions according to what they will produce. Similarly, no person can evaluate the great effort that is invested in fulfilling the Torah and mitzvot. And that's why we can't judge another person. Right? Maybe they do less than we do, but who knows how difficult it might be for them and how that is viewed. Therefore, we can never judge someone else, and even our own selves. It is so hard to know how much something weighs. So how does the judgment work then on Rosh Hashana? And keep in mind again, as I said before, it's called Rosh Hashana. Rosh means the head, the beginning of the year. Now, if this is simply a day of judgment, of accounting of the past, it should be Sof Hashana. It's the end of the year where we do the books and make sure everything is clear, everything is clean, everything is accounted for. It should be on on the last day of Elul. It should not be on the first day of Tishrei. If it was simply an accounting, a judgment of the past. But it's not. It's on the first day of Tishrei. It's on the first day of the new year. It is Rosh, the start, the beginning of the year. And in number 8, the Sifsei Chaim writes as follows. While it is true that the past deeds of a person determine his judgment on Rosh Hashana, nevertheless, the past is not the main focus, rather the future. The judgment on Rosh Hashana is not like that of an earthly court, which looks at a person's past actions in order to hold them accountable and determine reward or punishment. Such will be the case on the great and awesome future day of judgment, upon which we will be judged on all our past actions, when our entire life will be assessed to determine our ultimate reward or repercussion. But the judgment of Rosh Hashana is a different sort. The focus is mainly on the future. Judgment is merely a function of the special nature of the day, since it is, like I said before, the Rosh, literally the head of the year that incorporates the entire year to come. As such, God naturally judges us by virtue of this head. He will give us all that we will receive for the needs of the new year. That is what is meant by the expression, today is the day the world was conceived. Conception is used to signify that the entire year is created in potential on Rosh Hashana, and therefore today we stand in judgment. He writes, let's give an example from the real world. Every factory or retailer has an annual budget. The purpose of fixing a budget is for the future. That is, we deliberate about how to finance the growth of the business in the future. In order to do so, we look back at the productivity of the previous year. There are, of course, many factors. One can only allocate resources based upon possibilities that have been determined in the past. As such, one must know the income and expenditures of the past, and on that basis, prepare for the future. We see then that the purpose of a budget is for the future, while it is based on an accounting of the past. So too is the judgment of Rosh Hashana. It's the future based on the past, like a budgetary allocation. more like that than a trial. But there's an important aspect over here, because if I am sitting there trying to determine allocations for the next year, I take into account the last year for sure. But perhaps even more important than the productivity of last year is, where is the person today, and what is the person's projections, intentions, plans for the future. So there's one department which produced a lot, and the CEO asks, what's the plan for next year? And the guy says, I don't know. I haven't given it much thought. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It worked well last year, I'm just going to do the same. Okay, duly noted. He calls in a different department head who did not produce so much last year and says, what are the plans? And the person said, well, I assessed these areas is where we fell short. We understand why. This is the plan to correct that, to improve that. And this is how we're moving into the future. That's a whole different view now. Even though the last year might have been not overly productive, but here's a person coming with a plan, coming with conviction, coming with energy, coming to recreate. Oh, this person will be given a lot more resources going forward. So it's on the past to determine the future, but it's also on the Rosh Hashana. Where are we heading now? Where are we facing? What is going into our genetic makeup during this point of conception of this new year? And that makes all of the difference. We started off speaking about this is the day, the first day. And we asked, well, how does this manifest an event like the way we understand that Pesach and Shavuot and Purim and Hanukkah and Sukkot manifest events? What does this manifest? And we said it manifests the creation of mankind. It manifests man being judged, which we'll now understand better as being allocated. What will be given for the next year, be it in time, be it in vigor, be it in resources, what will be allocated? And we spoke about that the sixth day of creation is considered the start, because as Cheryl said, it's the creation of mankind. And as Janet said, because that is the purpose of creation. Let's focus now on that purpose of creation. Again, from Aish.com. The universe is God's global enterprise. And its main product line, goodness, good deeds, reflections of God. God created an amazingly beautiful, brilliantly engineered world, which is perfect in so many ways, but it is purposefully left lacking in others. God takes his children into the family business to complete his work. We of the human race are God's employees. Our job description is clear. Contribute to the enterprise's bottom line to the point of profitability. The spiritual assets must exceed the debits. To ensure the firm's ongoing success, an accounting system is put into place which examines each employee's performance vis-a-vis the company's bottom line. Rosh Hashana is the time of accounting where each Jew is called before the heavenly accountants, who weigh every spiritual transaction good deeds as well as infractions, to determine whether the employee's contract will be renewed for the coming year. Have we even recognized that God is in fact the CEO? On Rosh Hashana, we reaffirm that God is the creator and director of the universe. Amidst coronating shofar blasts and reflective prayer. Interesting. Coronating sure sounds like corona, doesn't it? Right? Certainly we recognize through all that we're going through with this now resurgence of the Delta variant. We're in God's hands over here, my friends. In performing teshuvah, repentance, we figure out where we went wrong. And just as importantly, how we're going to fix it. What are the plans for next year? We arrive on the day of judgment with mixed emotions. On one hand, we're optimistic and happy about the prospect of being inscribed for another year in God's majestic world. We saw Adam, he left Bedimus, right? He was judged favorably. On the other hand, we're subdued and introspective, recognizing we still need to advocate for the renewal of the contract, another year of life, because at least we have identified our problems and are prepared to take measures to ensure they don't happen again. But who can truly say they've done all they can do as God's employees and are therefore assured of a positive outcome on Rosh Hashana? Therefore, we are asked to consider our fates as hanging in the balance, and we are given until Yom Kippur to more fully examine our moral issues, better implement our fixes and resolutions. We try to account for our shortcomings and transgressions and resolve for them never to recur as we stand before the CEO, God the Almighty himself. Late in the day, we must conclude that for all our teshuvah, we still might find ourselves a tad less than fully qualified for a renewal of our life contracts. It may seem that all is lost. We look up and notice that God is our own Father in heaven. So during the prayer service of the high holidays, we beseech him, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Dad, Father, Abba, it's me. I'm your child. I know. I messed up. I have not done all that I should have done. You're my Father. Give me a break. A father is always willing to cut some slack, to give another chance, to be understanding, to be supportive. What father can resist that kind of sincerity on the part of his beloved child? And that is why before Rosh Hashana we need to prepare ourselves. We need to ready ourselves for this. It's not Happy New Year. We hope it will be a Happy New Year. I should say it's not Happy New Year. It's Shana Tova. It's a thoughtful, meaningful wish plan for a Shana Tova. That is what this day mirrors what happened originally. And this also we'll have in a future lunch and learn how that applies to the shofar, the blasting of the shofar. But it is Rosh Hashana. It is the start of the year. It is the genetic composition coming together for that next year. And the past is important, but even more important than the Sof is the Rosh, is where we are heading. And that takes time and that takes thoughts for each person to look at the areas where we stumbled and stumble and say, okay, what steps can be taken to make me a better person, to make me a better Jew, to make me a better human being that will allow me to contribute to the enterprise of God's world, to make this whole world a better place that I will serve to elevate it. That is the Rosh Hashana, Haba Aleinu Litova, which is coming towards us day by day, getting closer and closer. And may it be, my friends, for all of us and for the whole world, may it be Litova. May it be a wonderful, blessed, growth-filled, meaningful, healthy, productive year. Okay, my friends.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
So from what you're saying for mankind, just as Pesach, we shouldn't have non-Jews at the Pesach table if we can at the Seder. Shouldn't we be asking many people to like Rosh Hashana lunch, and since this is the birthday of their creation as well, and even if they're not aware of it, isn't there some extension of judgment to other peoples as well?
There is. The way we view it is really that the responsibility is upon us. And, amongst the 7 Noahide laws, right, the holidays are not part of their arena.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so that's why we don't necessarily go out of our way to invite non-Jews. And besides that, there are halachic issues when it comes to cooking on Yom Tov. So that allowance is for ourselves and for other Jews. When it comes to cooking on Yom Tov, right, that's a technical issue that becomes challenging. So that's why on Yom Tov in general, like I said, it's not part of the arena of the 7 Noahide mitzvot, and it gets a bit technically challenging in terms of the cooking that can take place on Yom Tov, but there are restrictions in terms of for whom it can be done.
I see, but it's not prohibited like it might be at the Pesach Seder to have other people that aren't Jewish.
It would not be prohibited as long as one needs to be careful in terms of those technical issues of the cooking.
All right, thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, everybody, good seeing everybody. Hope we'll see you on Shabbat. And yeah, I was away this past Shabbos. I know they tried to stream. Did the streaming work this past Friday night? It did? I'm not sure. Okay, well, I'll be here this week to make sure, to the best of my ability, that it does go smoothly. Okay, a good day, everybody, and a Shabbat Shalom, and a good Shabbos.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back. Thank you.